Welcome to A Scrap Life, a podcast solely focused on the hustlers, grinders, operators, and business owners who live and breathe the scrap metal industry every day. Here is your host, Brett Eckhart.
All right, guys, I want to welcome everybody to another podcast, another Scrap Life podcast. But this one is kind of a recent series that I've been kind of hatching on for a while. I think mostly because I've got two young boys and I get the question a lot. And I say young because right now they're 14 and 10, but I get the question a lot. So are your boys going to be, are they going to follow you into the industry and this and that? And so not only that, just a lot of questions on parenting and kind of how do I want my kids to, be raised and grow up. And so thinking about that, I've really thought about our industry. And I thought, because it's so heavily multi-generation, and I wanted to dedicate a series where we just interview multi-generation owners and operators, and partly because out of my own selfishness, because I want to get their advice for raising my own kids, and partly because I want to hear everybody else's stories. So the star of the new docuseries Repurposed, everybody should know, and if you don't, his name is John Sacco, and John Sacco is the one that got me into podcasting a few years ago. So I'm honored. I'm excited for this one. This is version 2 or whatever you want to call it, the second iteration of Generational Courage. So thank you, Mr. Sacco, for joining me, sir.
I mean, Brett, anytime, man. You sit when you text me, say, "Hey, you want to do this?" Heck yeah, I want to do it. I think the stories of our industry, I've done a lot on the podcast with generational businesses. I love what your idea here is because as I was listening to you, I get the same questions. My kids are older, but I get the same questions. So I love being here. Thanks for having me, man.
So I'm coming out swinging.
All right.
First question,
sir.
What has gardening taught you about being a father?
Well, if you don't watch it and you don't care for it, things don't grow up right.
Yeah.
And I think the garden, when you out there and you're working with your hands and you're loving the garden, it loves you back, and you see the fruits of your labor. We had the best crop of tomatoes this last summer because my wife and I, we put so much love into our garden, and it's so parallel with your kids. You've got to nurture them. You got to fertilize them. You have to give your kids, in the analogy of what you give your garden, and let's hope everything goes right. Let's hope they make the decisions to do the right things. My kids are 20. Giovanna's going to be 25 in May, and Giancarlo will be 22 in July. They're older than your kids, but they're great kids. And I just think gardening and is paramount. If you don't pay attention to something, it doesn't grow right. Your business, Brett, look at you. Look what your business growth and the growth of your kids, they're parallel. You got to watch it. You got to be there for it. You can't just plan it and grow. You can't just tell your kid something and not follow up.
Yeah. So when you said the word fertilizer,
yeah,
right, and working the garden, and with, let's say, the garden representing the industry as a whole, right? And maybe individual plants within the garden are the individual businesses that operate. And the reason I'm going with gardening is out the gate is because you post your Sanctuary Sunday pictures of your garden. So this isn't all the way out of left field.
I'm guilty of Sanctuary Sunday.
Yeah.
I'm guilty.
And the only reason I even know that is because you post stuff on social media and you talk about it. It's kind of one of your things that you discuss. Not the primary, but it's a piece of you. So when I think about that, I think about us as individual companies fertilizing the industry, right? And we fertilize it in multiple ways. We fertilize it by us as individual plants, taking the nutrients out and growing, but also dropping seeds and trying to figure out how to get more of those plants, right? And more of those plants in an industry to grow up and be a part of the garden. So when I, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is I wanted to piggyback on Repurposed and what that's bringing to the industry, because it's more than just a marketing ploy for Sierra. It's a true fertilizer for an industry, in my opinion, to encourage other owner operators to cultivate their own piece of the industry. Is that how you're looking at it, or are you looking at it a different way?
No, look, I think where you're going with it is right, because it doesn't matter if it's a mom and pop organization or some of these, much bigger publicly held companies that are in it, to some of the big monster family businesses. It's the same thing. If we are not nurturing, fertilizing our companies, fertilizing the message, putting something behind the message other than a post. Look, let's face it, Brett, you and I, we've drank the Kool-Aid on social media. And the power of it in promoting our industry, promoting what we do and who we are, has benefited us. But the industry repurposed is I don't want to sound so arrogant to say it's a gift to the industry, but it's a passion of mine, because I just hate when people say we're junk. I hate when people say we're waste. It drives me crazy. And in the EU, all metal recycling, all the commodities, copper, aluminum, brass, stainless steel, iron, it's all waste.
Yeah.
And nobody would call gold waste. Why? Because it's a commodity. It has value. And I like that analogy, because what we do isn't waste. We are the raw materials. We fill the supply chain, because we can't have what we have in our daily lives without what we do, what our industry does. And so I am hoping that Repurpose gives the fertilizer, the encouragement to everybody in this industry to speak about what we do, to showcase what we do, but be an environmental steward of their facilities, to be a safety steward. You got to do the right things too. Just because you fertilize it doesn't mean it's going to grow properly. You can over fertilize something,
Yeah.
under
Underwater it, or over
So, but then so I kind of started then in '86 when we started the equipment company. So I was my deal, the equipment. And then really, Brett, you talk about the passion for it changed when I got involved with ISRI and being an officer and start seeing getting inside. And then it dawns on me, even though here I am thinking I'm a smart guy, I'm not. It took me a lot of years to realize, hey, without a strong recycled materials industry, I can't sell equipment. So I better start fighting for us. And then that's where the passion grew. And it grew to the point where, Repurposed is born a few years ago. And the idea is because of all the negativity surrounded by what we do on a daily basis.
But you saw the long tail of it, right? And I think where people get caught up in business or even in like family business is like you want your kid to love it, or you have dreams and visions of your kid loving it like you love it today. Right. And I'm not saying you, but just people within our industry, because we've been doing it for long enough time where we wonder why doesn't my kid love it like I love it, right? Well, until they find their piece of it, it feels like what you're saying, like once you found your niche, it wasn't maybe run a cutting torch or run a shear or, exporting scrap. Like, I know your brother's involved in that, some of that's on that side, but once you had to find your piece of it that you could find some passion and put it behind it. And that's when you really fell in love with the industry, right?
That's right. When I started getting involved with the trade association and becoming an officer and started seeing the things that were important, and it was my dad who pushed me to do it because I told him, well, they kind of want me to run for secretary treasurer, and he said, I go, I don't know if I have the time, I don't know if I should. He goes, you're crazy. He goes, you need to be in the know. And he goes, and by being involved, you're going to be in the know, and that put us way ahead of the curve on like stormwater here at Sierra.
What year was that when he pushed you to, how old were you roughly?
2001. So how old am I? 23 years ago, 41.
Okay.
Wait, I don't know, 39. Wait, how old did I can't, I was born in 62. So what is 2001? Yeah, 39 years.
Yeah. So yeah, you were just shy of 40, but
yeah. So
you weren't necessarily like a young executive or like, under 40, like, like when someone that's 22 or 24, like it really, by the time it kind of took really hold, and the reason I want to bring that up
in my career. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to bring that up is because like, I hear it said a lot, but I think it's super important. And I'm saying this for my own benefit as well, is it may take your kid until he's 30 or 35 to really understand the opportunity that we're presenting them, right? Or understand like the opportunity that our industry has for them. Like we should be putting it into them, we should have them come check out the facilities or do whatever, but it may take a long time before they actually really understand the opportunity that's in front of them. And it may not be when they're in high school or junior high or right out of college.
I've tried to get my daughter to come run be the head of our marketing department when we had a change back in August. I don't know. Yeah, it was in August. And she's just not, she loves Sierra. She loves going to the ISRI convention. But she's just not ready. She's doing something now with her career that she's really enjoying. And I think one of the things that I learned from my dad over the years, I was destined to work for my dad. It was predetermined.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. No, I think that it took me a while to fall in love with what I do. And I'm encouraging my kids to first follow what they love doing. Let's just start there. I go, Sierra will always be here. Should that be something you want to do? And my daughter, though, she turned down a hell of a package I offered her. I'm like, wow, it isn't about the money for her. And I think that's important. It's about the passion that she has for what she's kind of doing now. And if she grows into, yeah, now I'm going to do this with Sierra, Dad, I think it'd be better because then she's really wanting to do it then, not being told you have to. Just let them come in naturally. And I
You
think by
said
that
you
organic
feel like
growth,
having it's sorry, but do you feel like that generation, because you have experience, I've that there it's less about the money for them and it's more about like maybe not a previous generation or two that where there's more like how much can I make right now? There's a little more like they want to like what they're doing or love what they're doing more than they want to make. And
well,
what do you think's driving that?
it's Giovanna's a very strong-willed woman, and very passionate about what she does. And she was when she told me she wasn't ready to come here. She says, "Dad, I don't need. Can I just chill and do something I'm enjoying?" But yeah, and she's making really good money right now. She got
Yeah.
a hell of a raise because she's worked with a startup company, a wine company, and you know what? She's really happy. And as a parent, what do you want from your boys, right,
Want to be
Brett?
happy, man. That's why I
That's
just went
it.
on that cruise. Like it's not my,
And
but
that's all
I
you
want them
want.
happy.
And
Yeah.
and and it's so great to see my daughter happy right now that should she choose, it'll be her decision. Let it be her decision and not my influence to her decision. And
Yes.
if my
Because
son, he's in
that's what
college.
causes I think that's what causes resentment is when that influence is there and there's what take the money, it is what it is. I mean, but when you start creating that resentment where they're like, I really liked what I did, but I could feel pressure to come into the business, then you're taking away one of the greatest things about being a parent, which is having your kids love hanging out with you. Like we discussed before we push record, is
Yes.
that's one of the
Right.
greatest things, and you can really take that away by pushing them to come in before they're ready, if they are ever ready.
And then there becomes that real nuance of if my daughter worked here and we spend a lot of hours a day working together, do you think she's going to want to hang out with me on the weekend when it's like, don't be my boss? Can you be my dad?
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic. And so I'm on my path for my kids. Where I pushing them is first chase your dream and your happiness. Whatever happens after that, God bless you. If it's wanting to come work here, great. If it isn't, great. Because they need to follow what they want because everybody's different. Brett, I would like for you to hear a little bit about how you were saying you and I both were destined to work for Dad, but all of a sudden, when did it hit you that, oh no, Brett Eckert's going to take United. It's time for me to take the bull by the horns. And now, you skyrocketed in the last few years since we sat down and did that very first podcast a few years ago. And then where you are now, your business has had an exponential growth. Is because it's like all of a sudden you just went, it's all me now.
Yeah, I think I always knew. I mean, I always knew what I was going to do. I always knew I was going to work in the family business, right? So for me, and I've said this to multiple times, I never knew, I thought about really doing anything different. Now, that I think I was going to be able to, find as many good people as have and been able to, recruit and build. Like, I don't know. I mean, I've always been comfortable in like a leadership type position, but I mean, I think I always, from a career standpoint, I always knew, and it would never was about how can I make my parents money. It was never about like I'm not some like savior of my parents. My parents have a great life. They were successful in their own right. So I never felt like I had to build them something that they could retire on. There was never that component for me. It was more about my parents were young. So I always had really young parents growing up. I think my mom was 21 when she had me. And so I always almost was not necessarily like a sibling relationship, but it was, while they were parents, they were, and great parents at that, it was, we worked beside each other. And a lot of that's because my dad gave me a lot of leeway, to just do shit the way I wanted to do it. And not everybody is as lucky as I am in that regard, right? Like and I know, talking to a lot of people, that not every dad has the ability to just loosen up the reins like that, especially at 40 something, right? Like I can only imagine at my age, if I had a son that was 20 coming in trying to tell me how to do shit, I'd be like, yeah, right. But my dad had that strange set ability to just be like, all right, like, he gave me some guardrails, but he's like, just do what you think needs done. And not everybody is lucky that way. And so I have a lot of admiration for my dad in that regard, and how he parented and how he fostered he fostered my courage, right? By allowing me to fail. And that's one of the reasons why this podcast, this series is important to me, is because I'm not saying that our way was the right way, because I know there's a lot of different ways to go about it. But how did your dad foster that courage within you to, push you to where you are today? I mean, your dad had to, put something into you to create that fire.
Well, he gave me an incredible sense of responsibility and common sense. Look, my dad, when he got out of World War II, had $90 in his pocket. He was unafraid. He went through World War II. He was an immigrant. World War II, he lived. He was unafraid. Every day was just a cherry, really. And I'm cautious. I'm very cautious on a lot of things that I do, financially, and I just don't make moves at times because I might be too cautious. But what he made sure that he instilled in me, if you think it through, go for it, and don't be afraid. You can't be afraid at everything you do. Cut your losses when it's not a good decision. Don't just keep throwing good money at bad. But he gave me that. He was there. He was the pillar. I mean, when I was undecided or indecisive and having to make a decision, Dad, what do I do? Dad, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I was blessed that he lived to 87. And so I was 47 years old when he passed. And, that's a lot of growing up with the man next to you to tell you what to do. I mean, he was always there to tell me what to do when I didn't know what to do, and also point out the things we weren't doing right, and he was really good at that.
Yeah.
But he instilled, don't be afraid.
But your dad was more of I mean, you told me stories, but your dad, he was involved almost until the day he died in the business, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, my dad was down here 2 months before he died. He was, he had the pancreatic cancer, and he was coming down here. And my dad, in the transition in time, as my brother ran the recycling demolition and I ran the equipment company, my dad was the yard manager. Okay. He went from whatever he was doing, so he could be out in the yard. And he was our yard manager, and that's what he did. And every time he'd go on vacation, he'd come back and he'd say, that vacation cost me an extra 50 grand. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, well, we didn't do this and we didn't do that. And this, it's just, but that's what he was. That he was the yard manager. Well, I don't want to say manager to belittle what he was, but that was what he enjoyed doing. He was such an organized guy. His nickname was Mr. Clean. So until he was too sick to work, he was here every day.
So what lessons are you trying to impart on your kids because at the end of the day, my kids, if I do things right, like I'll make enough money to live a pretty good life. I imagine your kids will do the same. But at the end of the day, it's not about how much money can we make. It's about what kind of like what kind of roots are we planting like with our kids so they can go live their life and be happy and want to come see us on Christmas and New Year's and hang out and go drink some beer and go fishing or whatever your hobby of choice is. But how do we say it's not about what can I give you? It's more about what can you go earn? How do we implant that in our kids? Like family business aside, what does that look like from you? And then in the conversations you have with your kids about that.
Well, okay, I got afforded any and everything I needed growing up. Okay. I like to say I was born with a copper spoon in my mouth, not a silver, but a good copper, a good value.
Yeah.
My dad afforded me an education, wherever you want to go. You know, whatever I needed, I always had. And but the character matters, your word matters. And I think ultimately that's the lesson. All right, kids, here's the deal. I don't care, you know, look, I'll give you all these things, but it's meaningless if you have no character. It's meaningless if you you know, start doing things you know you shouldn't be doing. You'll know the right and wrong. You'll know what's right and you know what's wrong. So if you start choosing the wrong, you can't expect me to support that. I'll support anything you're doing good, any idea you want to do to help you, as long as you're working hard. And I'm blessed to say that so far, those are the things my kids understand, and that's what they're doing. They're making the right decisions I think it's the toughest age right now, the right decisions to not do things that will impede their ability to succeed. And that's, you know, showing up, and they show up. My kids, you know, college is a lot of fun. They go to every class. And even if they went out the night before, they know they have to show up in class. That's the one, hey, you're going to class. And my son, who's not the most favorite fan of school, has every semester at TCU, he's got a 3.125 GPA. And I'm like thrilled to death that that's what because he has that sense of responsibility. And I think, Brett,
Yeah.
what is it that Dad has said? The sense of responsibility. Do what you want to do, go out and have fun, but don't skirt your responsibility. And that is the most important thing. Do not skirt your responsibility. And if you can do that, I'll support you, whatever you're doing, kids. And that's my deal with it.
Giving them some skin in the game, right? I've been reading this book lately. It's called Skin in the Game, and it talks about, you know what it talks about a bunch of different stuff. But when I think about it with my own kids and like the future is how do I, give them some skin in the game and make them really put skin in the game to be able to reap some of the rewards, but they have to feel the pain. They have to feel the other side of it. So when I think about, courage, and I think about, you say you're a conservative, financially, you sometimes maybe you don't pull the trigger, because you lean a little bit more on the conservative side. I feel like that is kind of an anomaly when you start thinking about like repurposed, right? Because you're talking about putting real skin in the game. And when you say, when people say I don't, there's two things that kind of annoy me, and I'll be straight up. When somebody says I don't have enough time, or I don't want to commit the money, right? And not even whether it's 1,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000, whatever that number is, they're unwilling to commit. I feel like it's a value judgment and a time judgment. And I think when you talk about being conservative and you're talking about the future generations and fostering courage, repurpose is like your version of A, not being conservative, B, fostering courage, like for other owner operators or even publicly traded companies, encouraging them to get out there and put themselves out there and highlight what they're doing a little bit of better job of that. So what effect do you plan, or what effect do you feel like that can have on the next generation of owner operators or kids coming up? And do you even think about that? Does that even come into your mind when you're putting these together?
Well, everybody has a different talent. Some of us are total operators. Some of us are finance wizards who can understand every detail of a financial statement to their business and how it relates to everything. I'm more on the creative side. And so it's interesting the way you said it, because it's the way you said it is, Repurpose has been a good investment, big investment, not cheap. But man, it's just something I love so much. And I know there's good coming from it. So I guess ultimately, if I'm so in love with doing something, the money and the time, people, how do you have time to do it? I go, you kidding? It's my favorite time to do it.
Yeah.
Tell me I got to go get up on last Sunday. I was up at 5:45 in the morning going over the final edits before we had to release this week. So I'm up at 5:45 on a Sunday morning. That wasn't work. I was having fun. So yeah, I think, Brett, to your point, there's so much about our industry that has to offer. And I think in season 2, I really get into that too, because there is so much this industry has to offer for people who don't want to be owners. That's important too. You don't have to be an owner to be happy. You have, maybe electronics is what you dig in, or maybe, there's so much to what you can do in this industry that will lead to a great career. And that's important. Our industry, everybody, a lot of kids, I want to work in tech. I want to work in IT and all that. Well, great. You can do that in the steel industry. What do you mean? Our industry is as techy as it gets.
Yeah.
Think about all the technology and all that new equipment and that tire shredding and your copper shredding lines and everything you've invested in this last year, these last couple of years since Brett, you and I have gotten to know each other. There's a lot of technology there.
Yeah.
It's cool technology. So to those who see this, there's such a great opportunity for them to be able to succeed in so many different areas in our industry. And I think Repurpose can open that door to look at the young lady Sabra in who was the melt shop manager.
Yeah.
She absolutely loves running the melt shop. Now, it is such a cool thing. So our industry and Repurpose can show avenues of different areas to go, from being, if you want to be a metal recycler and you want to run a shredder and you want to run a shear, great. You want to own that, great. Or maybe I want to work in a steel mill and I want to be that overhead crane operator that's lifting that ladle. So yeah, I think Repurpose does give a vision of what we do, and it gives a vision to those who see it where opportunity is, because sometimes people don't see it. And I think it really does show that.
Okay, my last question. So you could look up on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube and find a zillion answers for tax shelters, how to hire your kid, and paying $13,000 a year, and they could become a millionaire by the time they're 20, or whatever the case may be. But what lacks out there is us talking about how do we foster that courage within our kids and the next generation to go do their thing and put their stamp on their industry, their world, their career, their life. What do you want to tell everybody? Like, what's the one piece of advice that you feel needs to be said?
Well, I think as a parent, you better lead by example. You can't tell these kids to do one thing and you're doing the opposite. They see right through that crap. There's no doubt about it. If you're not leading by example, if you're not up, and when you come home for lunch, maybe, and your kid goes, "What are you doing home?" Meaning they know you're working. You better lead by example. I think sports, I'm sorry, but I think getting your kids involved in sports, dance, music, something that they have to be held accountable for, helps foster all of it. Because if mom and dad are showing them self-accountability by showing up every day and doing the right things and making sure, you are their role model, like it or not, and they see everything you do, they hear everything you say. So you better be that role model, because if you're not, they're going to think that's okay. But I think, look, you played football, you played college ball, the disciplines of sports. And I think giving your kids an activity growing up, hold that video game away. They can play that video game after they've done a sport, after they've done an activity that involves something physical or mental, fine. But I think those are the two things I would say. You better lead by example and make sure the kids are active growing up and doing as many activities as they can do to help them shape what they think what they go, I like that. I don't really like it, but at least I tried it. And that's it, Brett. I think that's the two important things.
Lead by example and accountability. I think like you sum it up. And I think if us as owner operators, we lead by example for our kids, example in our industry, which I think is exactly what you've done with this Repurposed docuseries. You've led by example. And I think that if we can preach that, leading by example and creating accountability within, if it's something you're passionate about, and if you want your business to exist 10, 20, 30 years from now, you show your kids what's possible. You say, this is what it takes to run one. This is what it takes to operate one. This is what it takes to be a part of one, and let them find their way and create some accountability along that way.
Absolutely. And like I said, I was afforded everything growing up, but I had to be accountable for passing my classes. I had to be accountable to showing up. I had to be accountable to all the things that I was afforded. Better show accountability or they're going to be taken away from you. And that was the accountability my dad held me to. And, but I knew what I had to do. And I think that's it, because I didn't want to let him down. How did you argue with that guy? It was hard to argue. Got to show you real quick.
I love it. Let's see it.
This is the story photo book of my dad's life. And it starts, I want to show you this real quick, because I think pictures like this, him in World War II, as you can see, guarding the gliders that were used to invade Europe, letters home to his sister. And, you see this about his life, and to do that. And then you see pictures like this with him, with his family, how important family was to him. That's a legacy he left behind. And if we leave a legacy for our kids, let it be the legacy that we meant something to them in a positive light, that we help them be something, whatever they want to be, and that we were there for them. And my dad was always there for me, no matter what.
How does not seeing a picture of your father, in World War II, like, not does that not create courage within you to say, what's the worst that could happen? Right? I mean, you're talking about a guy, you said at the beginning of the conversation, showed up with $30 every day was a cherry, because he was in a better spot than he was the day before, or he at least had a fighting chance to fight his way through it. Right. And I think that's what we can encourage our kids, the next generation, is if you don't fight for something, if you don't get out there and fight for it, whether it's your industry or whether it's your family or your country or whatever it is, like, you gotta have something that you're willing to fight for. And I think that's where the courage comes in.
And I think that's where the discipline comes in, because if you're going to fight for anything, you got to be in shape for that fight. Now, that fight isn't necessarily physical. That fight can be a lot of different things. And, and you're right. I mean, you're spot on with what you said.
Repurposed is your garden. That's how I view it. Just so you know, that's your garden. You're planting it. You're fostering it every day. You're fertilizing it. And it's a big part of it. So I appreciate you taking the time, and it's awesome. I encourage everybody to go watch it. It's not hard to find if you want to find it, but you can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on, you can find it. You got to take the time.
Amazon Prime season 1. Season 2 is just released YouTube. It'll be on either Amazon, Apple, or HBO Max probably within 8 weeks. We're not real sure, because we think season 2 has been already received on a different level than season 1. And So we'll see where it ends up, but within the next couple months, it'll be on one of the streaming services for sure.
I love it. Fight for something you believe in.
Right
Thank
on.
you, sir. I appreciate
Brad,
your time.
thank you, sir. God bless you. You keep up the good word, the messaging, the fight that you put forth, because I know you are a beacon and I know you're an influencer and a positive life to a lot of people who understand, hey, show up and get it done. And you are that guy. Really appreciate you and what you do. And I look forward to seeing you here real soon, my friend.
It takes a village. It takes a village. It takes all of us and our voices to make stuff happen. So it goes both ways. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.